It is now 10 o'clock in the east, 7 in the west. The headline of this hour, Barack Obama now breaks 200 on the way to 270 electoral votes, and the presidency, John McCain's hopes hanging by a thread at this hour. Polls have just closed in 4 states. CBS News estimates Barack Obama takes Iowa, the scene of his big caucus victory, the beginning of his journey. John McCain, meanwhile, we project wins Utah, the most Republican state perhaps in the entire country. Republicans have been rising in Mississippi since the Reagan years, and John McCain does so tonight. He is the projected winner there. It is election night in America.
CBS News election night coverage continues. Here again is Katie Couric.
And welcome back, everyone. As we mentioned, we have projected winners in 3 more states. Iowa goes in the Barack Obama column. Jeff Greenfield and Bob Schieffer. Let's take a look at the national map, because it looks more and more difficult, if not downright impossible, for John McCain to catch up at this point.
Impossible is a good word. There are 77 electoral votes, as we mentioned, that aren't even contested, from California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii. Those alone would put him well over the top. Those wins in Pennsylvania and Ohio, along with Iowa and New Mexico, absolutely clinched the deal.
Yeah, I mean, Barack Obama is going to be the next president of the United States. I mean, you did the numbers. You just can't figure out a way that John McCain can win now, because, as Jeff says, when you look down the West Coast there's 77 electoral votes there.
And he's pretty much guaranteed those states.
Barack Obama has probably 10-point leads in the polls going in there. Now, the polls are still open out there, and we want to remind folks, still go vote. It's important. But it's just virtually impossible.
So
now.
What you're saying, he could basically lose a lot of these white states that are undecided, all of them.
All of them.
And still, because of California, Oregon, and Washington, not to mention some other states that are leaning his way, like Colorado, for example.
Right. And if you go back to Florida, the key state in 2000, you can see that what's happening, he's about 150,000 votes ahead. I'm so old, I believe in popular votes. You know, that's what I... But look what he's doing very well in Palm Beach and Broward and Miami-Dade, which you would expect. But he's doing also well in this so-called I-4 corridor, which you've heard so much about. Tampa, through Orlando to Daytona Beach. George W. Bush essentially won big time in Florida because he prevailed in that area. And Obama is at no worse than even there. So while this is a very close race, now that might be icing on the cake, Katie, you know, instead of the state that puts him over the top. But again, he's performing better in places that Democrats haven't performed in. And it goes back to the overarching theme of the economy and an appeal much broader than Democrats make.
And in fact, he appealed a lot to Hispanics in the state of Florida. Let's talk about that for a moment, because the Cuban community, which was so important in previous elections, is no longer monolithic in the state of Florida. It's really changed in terms of generational shifts, with younger Cuban Americans not being so anti-Castro and pro-Republicans. And now non-Cuban Hispanics actually outnumber Cubans in the state of Florida.
In fact, the son of Jorge Mas Canosa, one of the most significant anti-Castro Cubans in Florida, built a huge Republican-oriented machine. His son and his widow have endorsed Obama. And that is a potentially significant deal. I'm sure Cheryl is going to be looking very hard at the Diaz-Balart brothers in Florida. Both of them may be endangered, and we could be seeing a major shift in the Cuban-American attitude toward policy.
All right.
All of that, but overhanging all of it is the economy. When you have 75–80% of the people in the country think it's moving in the wrong direction, it's just very difficult for a member of the in party to picture himself as the agent of change. And John McCain is a Republican.
Not to mention the huge number of home foreclosures that are going on in the state of Florida. I'm glad you mentioned Cheryl Atkinson, Jeff. That's a great segue to talk to Cheryl about some key congressional races. We haven't chatted for a while. Tell us, catch us up, bring us up to speed on what's happening there.
Well, since you mentioned South Florida and the Diaz-Balart brothers, they're both Cuban-American brothers who both hold seats down there, who weren't expected to really face a tough fight if you'd have looked at this maybe a year ago, but both are in difficult battles against Democrats who are likewise Cuban-Americans and are splitting that vote, and we're not sure of the outcome yet tonight, so we're watching that very carefully. In 2 other races, Democrats have won in Florida. They've both picked up seats from Republicans, both in the Orlando area. And significance, these are both districts that President Bush carried 4 years ago. In District 8, the incumbent Rick Keller, who barely won the primary, he loses to the fraud-fighting attorney Alan Grayson. In District 24, the incumbent Tom Feeney, he loses there to Democrat Suzanne Kosmas. Feeney made what a lot of Republicans thought was a pretty bonehead move. He used ads where he apologized for his ties to the imprisoned lobbyist Jack Abramoff. That apology didn't seem to help him a lot. And then also, you might look at one little bright spot for Republicans in Florida in District 16. This is sort of a cursed seat, it turns out. The seat vacated by Republican Mark Foley after his teenage male page scandal. The Democrat who replaced him, ironically, he'd run on a family values platform. He's under FBI investigation in his own sex scandal, and so he loses tonight to former Army officer Republican Tom Rooney. Democrats now have gained a total, if you look at all across the board, 4 seats. They're looking at least 20, they think, and then maybe in excess of 30, and they're on their way.
Maybe you don't want to run for office in the 16th
something
district
about
of
that.
Florida, Cheryl, right?
Fool around.
Yeah. We should mention, though, too, that a lot of these seats became much more competitive. You and I were talking off television after a lot of these folks voted for the financial bailout.
Yeah, we wanted to see really how many of these competitive seats went into play late in the game. There are about 53 of them in the House that are very tight. But we looked at a list and we kind of push-pinned on a map. 22 of those seats only went into play, Republican seats, about the time of the bailout vote in Congress, showing that these late seats in play, I think, prove how much the economy really had to do. Democrats went into this thinking maybe a year ago they could pick up 7 or 8 seats. Suddenly that jumped ahead to 20. Now it's above 30.
Meanwhile, Byron Pitts, there is a very interesting, hugely expensive Senate race going on right now in the state of Minnesota, between a former comedian,
That's right.
Al Franken from Saturday Night Live, Stuart Smalley fame, and then Norm Coleman, the incumbent Republican senator. Tell us about that race.
Well, Katie, this is one of those Senate seats that the Democrats targeted. They thought they could pick up. Let's look at our tabulation map of Minnesota. This is a tight race, as you said. Senator Norm Coleman going for a second term in office, Al Franken, the liberal Democrat, and Dean Barkley. Now, he can't win tonight, Katie, but the fact that he's in double digits is an indication that he's hurting both the other two candidates. You mentioned money. This is the most expensive Senate race this year. Let's look at the numbers. So far, the two top contenders have raised a combined $32 million. On top of that, the Democrats have poured in $18 million to Franken to help him win. An indication this is the state they thought they could be competitive in. Katie, if we can look at our filibuster map again, our filibuster scoreboard, to see where the Democrats stand at this point. They want to make a net gain of 9. To this point, they have 4 seats: Virginia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and New Mexico. Cheryl talked about how well the Democrats are doing in the House. If Barack Obama goes on to win, that's a Super Bowl. But they want the House and the Senate, they want a shutout, not just the championship.
And we should mention Norm Coleman actually put out some pretty nasty campaign commercials about Al Franken, and then he pulled them because he said, or I don't know, it was believed that they were actually hurting him, that people didn't like their negative tone.
Sure, and there's also a sense, though, that the damage was done with those ads. That in one ad, basically, he called Al Franken a foul-mouthed outsider. This is a guy who isn't of Minnesota. He moved away for 30 years, parachuted back in to try and win the Senate seat. If these numbers hold true, it's tight, and that approach may not have helped Coleman out.
All right, Byron Pitts. Byron, thanks very much. As we can see, I'm looking at my touchscreen here. The Democrats have gained 4 seats so far, and I want to go to Dee Dee Myers, if I could, and to Dan Bartlett. Dee Dee, what are some of the perils of single-party rule in Washington? I mean, President Clinton experienced it in 1992, and that led to the contract with America. He overreached in the minds of many. Is this a case of be careful what you wish for?
Well, it can be. I mean, the good news is that Senator Obama will become president with a large Democratic majority, and the bad news is that that can sometimes make governing difficult. Look, you're going to have a Democratic majority that is, first of all, across the ideological spectrum. You'll have about 60 members of the Blue Dog Coalition, which are the conservative Democrats, and then you'll have a lot of members that are on the far left end of the spectrum who've been waiting a long time for this moment to have a big majority and a Democratic president, and they'll have a long agenda of policy issues they want to push through. There's not a lot of money to do that right now. This is still a conservative country, slightly right of center, probably in spite of this result. So how does President Obama navigate those waters? It's going to be difficult. He's going to have to figure out what are his priorities, and then he's going to have to rally the Congress around to agree to his agenda and then help him push it through. It's not easy.
Dan Bartlett, how will Republicans in Washington handle this new world?
Well, I think after they kind of coalesce themselves and decide who the face of their party is going to be, the leadership of their party, what their message is going to be. But I think it's going to be very important for them in the early months to demonstrate to the American people that they're not going to just be obstructionists, that they are willing to put the country first, and as John McCain would say, and work with the new administration to demonstrate that they are trying to reach across the aisle. We'll know very quickly, Katie, in the first 100 days of his administration, if this holds true and Barack Obama wins tonight, what side of his party he's going to join. Is he going to join the more liberal forces that you see in the Democratic Congress that's going to be bolstered by their numbers tonight? Or is he going to live up to the moderate rhetoric we've heard on the campaign trail and really push to work across the aisle? There are big issues on the economy, on health care, on the environment, in which he'll be tested on those very issues where the liberal constituencies will want one thing, and the moderate Democrats and the Republicans will want something far different. And in fact, I think that's where the public will be as well. So he'll have some big choices to make early in his administration.
And Dan, before we go to commercial break, what do you think is the future of the Republican Party? I know there are some not-so-secret meetings going on right now to determine if the party should move more to the right and become more conservative, or be sort of the big tent that political strategist Lee Atwater wanted it to be in the late 80s. Where do you think it will go?
Well, I do believe that the party will always be strongest when it is a big tent, when you try to attract as many different elements of our constituency to the table. But it'll be important that we demonstrate that conservatism can be functional, that it can be relevant in the daily lives of the American people, that they can understand how our policies can help make their lives better. And so we have there'll be soul searching, there'll be some finger pointing, I'm sure, in the coming weeks. But at the end of the day, you got to choose that message, and just as importantly, you got to choose the messengers. Who's going to emerge out of this debate within the Republican Party and become the standard bearer for our party? And I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question just yet.
I was going to say that field is wide open right now. All right, Dan Bartlett. Dan, thanks a lot. Barack Obama inching closer to the presidency tonight, just 64 electoral votes away now, but there are still some battleground states still to be decided, so it is not over yet. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone. You're looking at a live shot of the Biltmore Hotel in Phoenix, Arizona, where supporters of John McCain and Sarah Palin have gathered. Meanwhile, it's a very different scene at Grant Park in Chicago, Illinois, where up to 1 million Obama supporters are waiting for Senator Obama to come out and address the crowd at the appropriate time. He apparently is en route to the Hyatt in Chicago to watch results. No, I don't believe that. Dean Reynolds is at Grant Park as well. He's been covering the Obama campaign. Dean, what can you tell us?
I'll tell you, Katie, that as Barack Obama left his house and made his way slowly toward the Hyatt Hotel here about a mile north of me, people were coming out of their homes, cheering as his motorcade drove by. It's a very festive atmosphere here. And one other thing about this evening, as you look at that map, it is the Obama campaign strategy come to life. It is a strategy that called for holding all of the Kerry campaign states that were won in 2004 and then expanding to these Republican states by George Bush, and that's exactly what he's done. Ohio, New Mexico, Iowa, and they're the ones that are going to win the election for him. And also, with respect to Ohio specifically, I think we can say that Joe the plumber had no coattails. In Ohio, Obama won convincingly in Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland, in Toledo, which is Joe Wurzelbacher, or Joe the plumber's home area, and in the areas around Cincinnati. So we, the geniuses in the press corps, have been asking the Obama campaign aides, aren't you worried about the McCain campaign making inroads into Pennsylvania? They were devoting so much time. Aren't you concerned? And they basically said, no, we're not concerned. We're going to North Carolina, we're going to Iowa, we're going to New Mexico, and on and on. And that strategy seems to have paid off.
And Dean,
Katie?
he did very well with working class white voters in some of those key battleground states, didn't he?
He did, and this is the plus side of that very long primary battle with Hillary Clinton. While Democrats were worried about Obama getting bloodied by the acrimony involved in that primary, what it actually provided was a very long introduction, specifically to states, but also nationally for Barack Obama. He got better known in places like Indiana, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and on and on. So it actually worked to his benefit.
Not to mention, Dean, the organizational infrastructure was in all those states, and they could just build and build on that during the general election.
It was like an army. I mean, they really, I got the emails saying, all right, we all want to go to Pennsylvania, and they'd all go to Pennsylvania. All right, we want to go to Indiana, and they'd all go there. And the latest one was, let's all go to Arizona, and we saw those volunteers flooding into Phoenix just last week.
Was that to tweak John McCain primarily, Dean, because he did win in his home state, but Barack Obama started advertising there in the final days of the campaign?
Right. Well, you know, as the Republicans said, he could have advertised all campaign long in all 50 states. But yeah, sure, it was to tweak him a little bit and to keep him distracted. And that's really what he did. I mean, he kept McCain pinned down in Pennsylvania in a losing battle. And what happened? Now we see that Iowa has flipped. Ohio has flipped. That was the strategy, and it seems to have worked.
All right, how did he do it? We're going to have some exit polling information from Anthony Mason. Dean, by the way, thank you very much, in just a moment. And we'll go down to Howard University in Washington, D.C., where there are some very elated students tonight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CBS News Election Headquarters here in New York. Cheryl Atkinson has a couple of key congressional races to tell us about. Cheryl?
Well, one, we know that there's going to be a big sigh of relief being breathed in Pennsylvania, where the powerful Democrat John Murtha, who's been there for 34 years, just got himself 2 more years. But it was a squeaker at the end because, as a lot of people probably had heard, he made some verbal gaffes, but he seemed to pull it out tonight anyway.
Said basically, folks, I'm going to let's go down to Howard University and Priya David. Priya, I know that a lot of new voters were young voters, and I know that 18 to 29-year-olds, 68% of them went for Barack Obama, 30% for John McCain. Can you hear me at all? It looks a little crazy down there.
We have never seen anything like this here at Howard University, here in America, here in the nation. This is our history. This is our legacy. We can be anything that we want to be. African American males everywhere have the opportunity. This is our history.
Thank you so much for talking with us. We also have Roberta McLeod, who's an administrator here, who seems like she's a little overwhelmed right now. Roberta, can you talk with us for a minute? Roberta, tell us how you're doing tonight. You're an administrator. You've seen so much. What are your thoughts tonight? Roberta's a little overwhelmed. There's so much here. Can you tell us how you are?
This is such an important moment for the world because
Thank you so much. Incredible senior tonight. You can feel the energy.
Lots of emotion.
Through the night.
Thanks, Priya. Lots of emotion at Howard University, and we'll be back with much more. You're watching Election Night on CBS. Well, the fat lady's not singing yet in this presidential race, but we can hear her clearing her throat. Barack Obama is just 64 electoral votes short of the presidency, and polls close in 5 more states in a half hour, including California with the mother lode of all electoral votes, 55. But there are still some big undecided races out there. Let's take a look. Highly competitive going into Election Day. McCain showing a lot of strength in Southern Virginia, rural Virginia, while Barack Obama is doing well in Northern Virginia, heavily Democratic part of the state. North Carolina, which, as we mentioned earlier, has changed a lot in terms of its demographics, a close race in the Tar Heel state. Elizabeth Dole has lost her Senate seat there, by the way. Indiana, which all night we've been saying is too close to call, probably the reddest of these swing states, highly competitive. Barack Obama holding his own. John McCain has a bit of a lead at this hour. In the Sunshine State of Florida, as Jeff mentioned, decided the 2000 presidential race. Again, very conservative to the north, more Democratic in the southern part of the state, with the central part of the state kind of in between appropriately. That is a close race as well. The state of Missouri, the show me state, which predicted the president for every election since 1900 except for 1956. That is a close race at this hour as well. Let's take a look at the national map if we can and talk about these close races. What do you think they're telling us in terms of where we stand right now, Jeff and Bob?
Well, what they're telling us is that Barack Obama's strategy of fighting it out on Republican turf is paying off. We can't say which way these states are going to go, but we can say that by forcing McCain to spend time and money and energy in states like, say, North Carolina, he took McCain out of playing on Barack Obama's turf. If I can, I'll show you North Carolina, which is 8,000 votes separate these two candidates. And if you can see why, and I want to show you one county. This is Wake County. It's within the Raleigh area, but it was heavily, heavily Republican in 2004. Huge influx of new folks from out of state, upscale, more socially moderate and liberal. The Obama campaign put incredible resources into Wake County, and I haven't drawn that particularly well, but you can see that now Obama is winning that. The reason why McCain is keeping North Carolina close is out here in the more rural western areas. That was Jesse Helms country. McCain is doing very well.
The so-called Jesse-crats, right?
Well, those were Democrats who turned into Jesse-crats and then turned into Republicans. But this state is as close as can be, and that's what Obama wanted to do.
And in fact, Anthony Mason has some interesting exit polling information. We can talk about these close races in a moment. But Anthony, what can you tell us?
Well, Katie, as Jeff was pointing out, I mean, Barack Obama is doing better in North Carolina with both blacks and whites. If we go back here all the way to the back of the file, you can see that in North Carolina 4 years ago, John Kerry got 27% of the white vote. Barack Obama has improved on that significantly, getting 37% of the vote. He's still far behind John McCain, but that's a more than 10% improvement on the white vote. And on the black vote, he's winning overwhelmingly, 97%, about as close as unanimous as you can get. And that's up from 85% that John Kerry got 4 years ago. So doing better among white voters, doing better among black voters. That's why this race is still too close to call. Katie?
All right, Anthony, thanks so much. All right, we actually have a call.
Oh, good.
Very exciting, Bob. So hold that thought for a second.
Right.
We can tell you the state of South Dakota, pretty red state, pretty conservative state, goes for John McCain. No surprise that he was expected to win in South Dakota, and CBS News projects him as the victor in that state tonight. Go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, all of these battleground states, are states that George Bush won the last time out.
And in fact, he put him on the defensive, as Jeff said,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he should have been, he had to return to a lot of these states at the last minute because he had, to his peril, neglected them.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And now we're seeing that if in fact he wins all of them now, if John McCain wins all of them now, you've still got the West Coast out there where in all of the polls, Barack Obama had big leads. There's 77 votes out there, Oregon, Washington, California, and Hawaii. So, you know, even if John McCain wins all these battleground states, Barack Obama is going to win the presidency.
17,000 volunteers for Obama in North Carolina. I interviewed some of them. One told me the story, I think I may have mentioned this to you, that he was calling for votes in Obama headquarters and he looked at his cell phone and the person behind him was text messaging him from a different call sheet. There was such an intensive ground game in North Carolina that it's what's keeping this close, may tip it to Obama.
All right, we're going to get caught up on some of these Senate races with Byron Pitts. We mentioned Elizabeth Toole, which I think is one of the big headlines in terms of the Senate, lost her seat to Kay Hagan tonight. This Republican icon really dragged down by President Bush in many ways, and Kay Hagan ran a very aggressive campaign. Tell us about some other Senate wins and losses, if you could, Byron.
Well, Katie, just like it looks like Barack Obama is taking care of business in the race for the presidency, Democrats are taking care of business in the Senate. Let's look at our scoreboard for the Senate races. So far, the Democrats have picked up Virginia, as you said, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and New Mexico. They hope to make a net gain of 9. So far, they've picked up 4. Now, for the Republicans, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, he hung on to win in Kentucky. But, Katie, consider this. He won tonight, looks like, by about 4 points. 6 years ago, he won by 30 points. An indication of the uphill battle facing Republicans. And in Georgia, Saxby Chambliss, that race is too close to call.
All right, so some very competitive races still out there. Out there. All right, but we want to mention that we have a call in the state of Nebraska, and it's a bit of a tricky one. John McCain is the projected winner in the state of Nebraska, but he's only winning 3 electoral votes at this point because it's apportioned according to congressional district, and I'm going to let my genius colleagues here explain what that means.
In 48 states, you win the state by 1 vote, you get all the electoral votes. Maine and Nebraska do it differently. If you win Nebraska, you get a couple of electoral votes, and the others are distributed by whoever wins the congressional district. The Obama campaign put some effort in the Omaha area, thinking if they needed it, they might be able to get 1 electoral vote. We will find out. I rather doubt it's going to be critical.
All right, yeah, at this point, that's for sure. All right, Cheryl Atkinson, catch us up on some House races, if you could.
All right, first we want to look at New Hampshire, where one of the 30 freshman Democrats hung on to her spot, but this was a tight race. It wasn't a sure bet. Carol Shea Porter beat out the Republican Jeb Bradley. She was the incumbent. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee poured in a lot of money to try to save this seat because they figured it was close. Now, with her holding on to her seat and Chris Shays losing his, the Republican from Connecticut, there are truly no more Republicans left in Congress in the New England area. That's a changing picture in that. That's the significance of that. Also, we're looking in South Florida. We've been talking about the Diaz-Balart brothers and those races. One of them we are now projecting in the 21st District. Lincoln Diaz-Balart does win versus his Democratic opponent, Raul Martinez, in what I think a lot of people consider the nastiest House race in the nation, with kind of each one calling the other the bigger crook. Martinez had been indicted in the past. The indictment was thrown out, but Diaz-Balart actually used the mugshot from that arrest and indictment in some of the campaign ads. In the end, though, that Republican holds on to that 1 seat. His brother's seat, which is nearby, is too close for us to tell you how that's going, but we're watching that as well.
All right, Cheryl Atkinson, thanks very much.
And
Go
one
ahead.
more thing, the net House's seats won are now at 6. We've been talking about they're possibly going to be in excess of 20, 30 tonight. Right now, they have 6 so far.
All right, but still a lot of races to go, right, Cheryl?
Exactly.
All right, thanks very much. We're now joined by Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty, who we met, of course, during the convention earlier this summer and had the pleasure of talking to him then. Governor, so what is your reaction so far to this electoral map and how it's shaping up?
Well, Katie, of course, we remain hopeful, but the fact of the matter is, if you're a serious student of the electoral map, if John McCain does not win Ohio and he does not win Pennsylvania, the road for him to get to 270 is very, very difficult. In fact, it would almost be impossible, even with his clean sweep in the remaining states.
What happened in the state of Minnesota? What happened in the state of Minnesota, do you think, Governor Pawlenty? I know that John McCain was quite popular in the exurbs and the more rural areas of Minnesota. Do you think sort of the urban areas just were too strong for Barack Obama?
Well, Minnesota is a state, as you know, that leans Democrat normally, not so much that it's implausible for a Republican to win, but I think the dynamics in Minnesota somewhat mimic much of the rest of the country. Number one, you have the political backwash of the last 8 years that people were concerned about. Number two, we had a historic bottom dropping out of the economy. Number three, Barack Obama spent $1 billion, or nearly so. It's a demolition of the public financing system, so that's a quantum change in a money advantage, and some other factors as well. But those are three things that contributed significantly to Barack Obama's victory.
I know you're considered a real star, a rising star in the Republican Party. You were considered as a potential vice presidential candidate for John McCain over the summer. What do you think is the future of the Republican Party, Governor Pawlenty? How do you think it will be able to re-energize itself in the aftermath of this election?
Katie, I think the Republican Party is going to go through a national Dr. Phil moment, or more than one moment, but it's going to need to come to grips with the fact that this is a changing country in terms of technology, demographics, culture, economics, and we have to rely on our principles and make sure that we stick to them, but we have to apply them in the emerging issues and circumstances of our time. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that. We also need to do a better job of reaching out to modest income people, Hispanics, African Americans, women, and younger voters. That's a tall order, but we have not been forward-looking in that regard. I think we've been too much time looking backwards.
All right, Tim Pawlenty, real quickly, do you think it needs to become more conservative?
I think we need to be more practical. It's going to have to be more youthful. It's going to have to be more forward-looking in all those ways that I just mentioned. I don't think you take the conservative principles and throw them overboard, that's for sure, but you better be able to do a better job of explaining how it meets the real concerns of real people on bread and butter issues.
All right, Governor Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota, thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Let's go out to Chip Reed, who's in Phoenix, Arizona. Chip, I understand McCain supporters are getting some instructions right now.
That's right, Katie. They've been in a ballroom not far from here, and they're all now flooding in here. Well, I say flooding. They have to go through magnetometers, so it's a slow flood. We had heard that Sarah Palin was going to give a speech here in about 20 minutes. It's a little odd. They won't exactly characterize the speech. They won't say it's a concession speech, but they won't deny it either. But it's hard to believe that she would speak before Senator McCain if it were going to be a concession. So we're waiting to see exactly what happens. The last we heard about them is that John McCain and Sarah Palin are both in the Barry Goldwater suite here at the Biltmore. Barry Goldwater, of course, is a hero of John McCain, watching the returns. Katie?
All right, Chip Reed in Phoenix tonight. The math on the map not adding up at this point for John McCain. Barack Obama, meanwhile, appears headed for a very historic night as polls in some key states are about to close. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Election Night 2008 here at CBS News in New York. And the supporters of Barack Obama can almost smell victory. They know it's at hand. Nearly 1 million of them have gathered at Park in Chicago, Illinois. Barack Obama at the Hyatt Hotel nearby, apparently, and their 2 daughters, Sasha and Malia, as well as some friends, close personal family friends. And meanwhile, almost 1 million of his other close personal friends waiting for him to show up. Dean Reynolds, tell us, I guess the mood in the Obama campaign is pretty jubilant, obviously.
No question about it. And I've been at the fireworks display on the 4th of July in Grant Park, and there have been 1 million people at that. And this looks, if you look around, like 1 million people at least down here for this very special occasion. We can also add to the list of the people who are with Barack Obama tonight. Senator Joe Biden is also at the Hyatt Hotel, which is really just about a mile north of where I am sitting right now. And they're in their suite looking as the returns come in. And again, as I said before, it is just following state by state their strategy. And it has been a successful one. and a very, very disciplined one, and they have stayed with it, and it's worked.
In fact, Dean, you know, it's a very cohesive campaign. I remember interviewing Senator Obama recently, and he said, you know, I've always thought there is no I in team. It seems, as you said, very, very disciplined, very efficient, always on message, and rarely rattled. Is that an appropriate description?
Yeah, and no backbiting either, Katie. I mean, there has been really no internal feuding among their top echelon. They have been very focused. They've been very loyal. And unfortunately for us, they've been very taciturn in doling out little nuggets of information.
Well, it's quite a crowd, as we see, and many young people. I mean, the youth initiative, young people have often been targeted, but they rarely actually get out and vote. This is really a dramatic change in that trend, isn't it, Dean?
Boy, I'll tell you, you know, I was listening to Bob Schieffer and Jeff Greenfield talking about 1968. I was here in 1968, too, for that. I was a youngster. But I can remember the demonstrations here when the Democratic Party was really rent asunder. And 40 years later, it seems to be coming back together now in a very special and perhaps unprecedented way.
Do you have any idea when Senator Obama is expected to come out? I guess not until he gets the magic number of 270 electoral votes.
Not till he gets that, and I think obviously he's waiting for a call from Arizona. And perhaps he'll wait and get that call, and then maybe even wait to hear what John McCain says to his supporters. It's just a question of sort of protocol on these occasions, and I think Barack Obama wants to follow that protocol.
All right, Dean Reynolds, thanks. I know we'll be checking in with you momentarily. Dean, thank you so much.
It's okay.
All right, well, after a commercial, we're going to be talking with historian Douglas Brinkley, who has some very interesting things to say and a unique perspective as well. That's right after this. We're back and now talking to presidential historian Doug Brinkley. Doug, you know, we talk about the big picture, but just give us even the bigger picture. Is this a realignment election in your view, something that's almost a tectonic shift in the political landscape?
Well, absolutely, Katie. I think really since 1980, we've been living in the age of Ronald Reagan. I think that's coming to an end tonight. We're looking at a historic victory for the Democrats and Barack Obama. I think you have to go back to 1964 when Lyndon Johnson had such a landslide over Barry Goldwater to see how momentous this is. And the fact of the matter is the whole world's watching. About 80–90% of the world was pulling for Barack Obama. He wins tonight, and it's so historic to have an African-American that's president of the United States when 100 years ago Booker T. Washington came to the White House to dine with Theodore Roosevelt, and TR got dismissed and people just attacked him mercilessly. And here it's not about dining. It's going to be his White House, it looks like, the way things are going tonight.
As you well know, Doug, Ronald Reagan famously said government isn't the solution, government is the problem. Do you think we're seeing a shift in the way government is viewed and will have a more activist government, particularly in the wake of this huge financial crisis and really disillusionment with a number of major institutions in this country?
Well, yes, and of course September with the dark economic news was not good for John McCain. The economy was a big part of this election, but I think you're going to see Obama only able to do a couple of big things, something like universal health care. That's something the Democrats have wanted to do since FDR. FDR got us Social Security, Lyndon Johnson, Medicaid and Medicare, but that's been hanging out there. Obama will probably push something big like that, but he's going to have to do a lot of common ground things. And in foreign affairs, it's going to be very interesting. I think what we need to realize, this is the big speech, not the inaugural. Tonight in Chicago is what matters in history, because tomorrow Obama is going to be de facto president. We're dealing with a lame duck president. Bush, speech, I'm sure, but tonight's the night history's going to remember.
Well, how does he find that common ground? Does he invite people like Richard Lugar, for example, into the cabinet? Does he keep Defense Secretary Robert Gates? I mean, does he really try to start on day one to steal a phrase from Hillary Clinton and really reach out to some Republicans to show that he is, in fact, someone who is a consensus builder?
Absolutely. You know, over and over again, Barack Obama said that Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals, has meant so much to him, the way Lincoln was able to get through crisis by bringing in opposition characters. So I think you might see Gates, Secretary of Defense. Chuck Hagel is a name we're going to be hearing more and more about because, you know, Obama liked Hagel. He went with him over to Iraq. So there are going to be some Republicans getting in this administration. On the other hand, the Democrats, it's a big victory, and you're going to want to get the Democrats in key positions also.
All right, Doug Brinkley. Doug, thanks a lot. We're coming up on 11 o'clock in the East, 8 in the West. The polls are about to close in California and 4 other states, and we're about to witness history. You're watching Election Night here on CBS.